Hi, everybody. This is Victor Agreda Jr. And this week on Coders, we're going to be talking to Peardrop, which has an interesting proposition for software out there and your router. Join us right after this.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com.
Hi, everybody. I'm Victor. And this week on Coders, I am joined by Dale Willis, who's the CEO and co-founder of Peardrop. Dale, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Victor.
So where are you guys located? You're in Wisconsin, right?
Yeah, we're out of Madison, Wisconsin.
And why in the world are you in Madison, Wisconsin, and not in Silicon Valley?
So I've been part of the University of Wisconsin-Madison for a really long time. I did my undergrad here, as well as my master's degree. And while working on my PhD, we started working on the kind of fundamentals behind Peardrop, and we decided to see where we could take it from there.
Well, you're a young guy. That couldn't have been too long ago. It's been interesting to me to see this evolution of networking. You know, a lot of people take these sorts of things for granted. They're not really thinking about, how does the software get from the out there into my home or into my phone. Even with things like Netflix, they don't think very much about that. It's like, it goes off in the internet somewhere, and the internet's this abstracted thing. They don't realize that content, the closer it is to them physically, is actually advantageous to them as a consumer. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So you probably saw the Netflix demonstration that we did with Peardrop. We started that last summer when the FCC was having all the net neutrality problems, and we kind of took a different approach to it by actually pulling the content onto a router to kind of showcase the power that Peardrop can provide to the end users.
So tell us a little bit about, and in seeing that, I understood your value proposition, and having seen this sort of thing before. I worked with Akamai in the very, very early era, the first .com boom. And so I'm curious, what is it specifically that Peardrop has as its value proposition?
So the major value proposition that Peardrop provides is it's a way to allow developers who traditionally would work in more of a systems approach. So more cloud based. You're not worried about memory. You're not worried about CPU cycles. It's a way for them to actually allow their applications to exist on Wi-Fi routers, on Wi-Fi access points, and we provide a nice simplistic framework for that.
So I'm curious about the details of this, but we'll get into a little bit about the mechanics of how that works in a moment. I'm curious. I looked at your blog. I noticed that you just had your version point 1 come out. Is that right?
Yeah. So we the versioning numbers are a little quirky, but we've had a version out there for quite a while, but we kind of took a step back, and I wanted to revamp the platform a little bit. So we decided to kind of press the reset button, and push forward with a new framework. And so that was the first release that we pushed.
Okay, because you changed from OpenWRT to Ubuntu, a flavor of Ubuntu, right?
Yes. Now we're running on Snappy Ubuntu Core.
Okay, and that seems to be, of course, one of the great things about Linux is that it is so adaptable, right? And Snappy seems to have a good user base. That's why you guys picked it, though, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I chose a long time ago OpenWRT because it was the kind of simplest platform to get going for router hardware on. But time and time again, we would kind of see problems. I'd go out to developers and I'd say, hey, you could do this awesome thing if you can cross compile and if you can, do this, that, and the other. And it always kind of limited our user base. So I wanted to explore options to fix that.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about this, because I have always been a fan of the idea that, cloud-based computing, I mean, computing in general, the internet allows us to be very distributed, right? And I know some people like Dave Weiner has talked a lot about this as well. And I remember when Twitter was growing, And you probably remember the fail whale happened a lot. You don't see that guy a lot anymore. They've scaled very, very well. But his point was also, even with redundant backups, all these other things, your tweets, just to use one example, exist out there in a place where it's kind of hard for you to get to those, right? And so if that was stored locally, you would have your own, but then you would have, the work of other people as well. There's all sorts of ways that we can create this network that it's much more redundant than it is now, much more, secure in many ways. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of directions and a lot of scenarios where we can see kind of distributed networks popping up in more of a peer-to-peer fashion, and I think we've seen that through some different browsers and things that have started to look at that technology space, and it's only just beginning. It's going to get a lot more complex and a lot more interesting in the years to come.
Yeah, and the complexity is what blows my mind, because I was teaching networking like 8 or 9 years ago, and now I look at it and I'm like, I don't know what the heck, is going on. But what I find fascinating is you're talking about storing stuff on my router. So practical considerations, like how much room does my router actually have to store stuff?
So that's definitely a good point. The average router that you're going to buy, even when we first started this project 2.5 years ago, I had a lot of people kind of laugh at me because a typical router is going to have 32 megabytes of flash. It's just enough to run the operating system that was built for it. But you fast forward 2 years to today, a lot of routers are actually having a lot more space, a lot more capacity. I mean, you can see that from simple examples like the Google's brand new On Hub that's coming out. It's coming out with 4 gigabytes of flash, and that's not a mistake. That's all of these routers are going to start doing this in the future.
So I guess the question is what is the benefit for? I mean, for Google, it's probably a lot of user data. Is it media? What's being stored in these?
I think that storage is definitely one aspect of it. We're approaching it from a slightly different aspect, from a little bit more computation capabilities and simplifying things that just can't exist today in other locations. So, for instance, we're looking at parental controls, and that's something where you can do it on an individual device. But if you could actually push it onto the router, it'd be a lot more efficient and a lot more effective and a lot simpler to configure. So, I think that I think we'll see Google's play in the long run. We know it's going to be an IoT-based play with Nest and Brillo and everything else and Weave. But that space is still being early explored.
And where do you guys fit in that space? Because I definitely see an Internet of Things use case for what you're developing.
So that's one of the spaces where I've kind of purposefully kept at an arm's length a little bit to kind of see how things play out, because from our standpoints, we're more of we're looking at things from more of a quarterback level, from more of a management console level. And while everyone else is kind of fighting over protocols and standards, that's not a space that I wanted to kind of dive into head first, so to speak. And so that's why we're looking at other systems, because once you start putting applications on the router, there's a huge world out there beyond Internet of Things that you can provide.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think the Internet of Things aspect of it is just because that's very consumer friendly. It's consumer facing. It's a new shiny thing. Smartphones 6-7 years ago, it's a new shiny thing. Now we've got Internet of Things. So let's talk about, in day-to-day use, we talked about the Netflix example, which I thought was interesting. So if you've got a variety of memory constraints and considerations, even though that's getting better all the time, where are you in terms of today's implementation? And what is it if it's not, it's obviously not storing 4 gigs of movie files on your router, right? Mm-hmm. So how are you guys, helping the end user and helping the network providers with their traffic, basically?
So one of the things, the Netflix example is kind of the best example from the standpoint of the storage capabilities. The nice thing about routers in general today is that they pretty much all of them will have external USB capabilities. So there's nothing stopping you from plugging a terabyte hard drive into it. which is perfectly fine from my standpoint. You can store pretty much every movie you would watch in an entire summer from Netflix on a drive like that. So
Mhm.
if memory is a problem, there are absolutely solutions to it. But what we're looking at is a little bit more of the computational capabilities that you can provide. Because even in what I was able to create through Netflix, it took some computational effort to kind of discover how to actually do that in a DRM safe manner. And so that was kind of the use case that I was approaching it from two angles. One is, hey, we can store these things on the device, but the other is, hey, we need this intelligence sitting on the device to actually do it. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg. You kind of need both pieces.
Gotcha. Okay. So, what are some other applications that, and especially for developers who are out there, what are some of the applications that they can be creating for your platform?
So IoT is definitely a space where we're interested in having developers kind of toy around with. It's something that's easily supported by us, but not something that we necessarily have to push to developers. The interesting use case for our system is that we're actually running not only on top of Snappy Ubuntu, so you kind of have the full support of the Ubuntu infrastructure, but we're also running on Docker, and we're actually using that as a way to kind of containerize applications. So what one really interesting thing that we've been able to do is take several research projects out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison here, and we've actually taken IoT research efforts where they had a cloud backend component of visualizing the data, storing the data, processing the data, and I actually allowed them to migrate that into the Peardrop infrastructure without changing a single line of code. So it could be as simple as, if you're using Heroku for a backend, you can attach your code base to our system and kind of push it to the developer. So we're hoping to kind of leverage essentially the cloud, literally the cloud within the home, and just see what developers can really push for.
So this is really still at the very early stages. There seems like you guys are laying down a foundation, and it's still a lot of developers need to come at this problem and look at it and implement a lot of different things. I mean, you're hoping that, just like when Apple opened the App Store, it's like, here's this great platform. You guys show us what we can do with this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been eyeing up approaching hackathons, conferences, meetups to kind of push the platform. And so now that we're kind of finalizing our official 1.0 release with the brand new Snappy infrastructure, I'm really excited to see what we can do in the next month or so.
And how important, when you're talking about at this level, how important is security to your platform?
So it's very, very important to what we're doing. That's probably the most important thing. I tell my developers that are in the other room, they may be listening, but I basically tell them, my number one goal is simplicity. I want to be able to provide things to our developers in very simplistic ways. But our second biggest goal, almost equal to that, is security. And so we're working on a very robust PKI, private key infrastructure, to support that through self-signed keys and key certs and things of that nature. So.
That's great. You talked about working with the university. How important is that to something like this, right? That can take a while for a platform to sort of flourish in the marketplace. How important is it to work with researchers, essentially?
I would say it's incredibly important. I don't know that I would have been able to do this if I was just a developer out in the Bay Area. I probably would have had a little bit easier access to developers. But the interesting thing about what we're doing is that if I talk to 10 developers about it, about half of them will get it right away, and the other half I'll have to kind of explain several different use cases, and then you see the aha moment. And so it's been really nice to work with researchers in this space, especially networking and wireless researchers out of this university are very, very strong. And so they really understand it, and they're really interested in the platform and the ways that it can kind of revolutionize how we use the internet in the homes in the years to come.
Yeah, well, and like I said, it's a little bit esoteric. As people who are end users, they would think, okay, wait, are you storing my Netflix catalog on my router? It's like, no, that's not really it. This goes beyond that. And it, looking a little bit forward, how do you see the infrastructure of the internet as we know it changing as a result of software-defined networks and what you guys are doing? And there seems to be a lot of focus right now on software. A friend of mine who works at Facebook mentioned the Facebook Messenger assistant M that came out, right? And he said artificial intelligence is happening. And do you see that that's sort of where we're continuing to go? This is going to permeate throughout all the network infrastructure.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that artificial intelligence and SDN are going to be a huge combination and a real game changer especially as we also push gigabit infrastructure. Gigabit infrastructure is fantastic. Obviously, we all would love it, but the problem is that when you sit back and you think about it, if I'm going to try to stream a terabyte's worth of data to you, and we're doing that across the country, and you all of a sudden decide to stop it at some point, by the time that message gets to me, if I'm sending it, we could have multiple gigabytes of data that are sitting in the pipes that just need to disappear somewhere. So we really need to start thinking about that and those problems as we kind of push for this infrastructure more and more.
Yeah, and it's a huge problem. It's going to take a lot of people working on a lot of different areas of it, for that to happen, right?
Yeah.
Well, Dale, thanks for joining us. This has been really interesting stuff. Can you tell us anything about your guys' future plans, or should you just keep doing what you're doing?
So right now, we're actually looking to push this into the end consumer space, and so we're going to be launching a Kickstarter, hopefully in the next month or so, and we're really going to try to target applications for end users, and we're hoping to kind of from that really show developers that people need this infrastructure and that it really benefits them. And we're hoping to see where it can go from there.
Fantastic. Well, it's a really cool technology, and best of luck to you guys. Thanks again for joining us on Coders.
All right, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So this has been episode 24 of Coders. We'll be back next week talking more about software and what you guys can do with it. For Victor and all the team here at RCR, thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Coders is a production of RCR TV News. To reach Victor Agreda Jr. or to suggest a show topic for Coders, you can reach him on Twitter at Superpixels. For all the latest news on wireless code and the whole world of wireless, check out rcrwireless.com.